Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive. We're coming to you from Vintage Car Chronicles, your daily stop for all things cars on Spotify. Today we're answering a listener request going deep into the world of those awesome little Japanese Kai cars.
Yeah, Kai cars, they're fascinating. I mean, they're not just about car design. They're a window into post-war Japan. Their innovative spirit, even how city life shapes what people drive.
Absolutely. So we have articles, historical data, even some personal stories people have sent in about Kai cars. But first things first, how did these little cars, these pocket rockets, get so incredibly popular in Japan? We're talking like 40% of new car sales at their peak. That's wild.
Wow, yeah, it's huge. To understand that, you really have to go back to 1949. So, picture this. Post-war Japan, resources are scarce. Most people can only dream of owning a car. The Japanese government wants to boost the economy, get people mobile, so they create this Kai car category. Kai means light automobile.
And these early Kai cars, from what I've read, were seriously tiny. Engines starting at 150 cc, like that's a motorcycle engine.
Exactly. It was all about squeezing every ounce of efficiency and affordability out of what they had, really tight restrictions. So picture this. You're driving something the size of a golf cart, but it's got an engine smaller than your lawnmower.
Huh. I can't even imagine. But those regulations, as restrictive as they seem, they actually kind of force those automakers to be super creative.
Right. They had to innovate to squeeze every bit of functionality, every bit of style they could into those tiny packages.
And that really speaks to Japanese engineering, doesn't it? I mean, over the decades, the regulations loosened up a bit, allowed for slightly bigger engines, but that core idea, doing more with less, that really stayed at the heart of Kai car design.
It did, it did. And it's amazing how even though the engines were tiny, they didn't shy away from new technology either. We're talking automatic transmissions in the late 60s, disc brakes in the 70s, turbochargers, even all-wheel drive becoming more common in the 80s.
It's like those limitations were a catalyst for innovation.
I think you're right. It pushed them to pack as much performance, as much technology into those little cars as they possibly could.
Yeah. I read about this gentleman's agreement among the Japanese automakers. So even though they could have gone higher, they capped the Kai car horsepower at 64. It was like they knew an all-out horsepower war would kind of ruin the whole point of the category.
Exactly, exactly. That kind of restraint, it says a lot about the Japanese approach to car design. It wasn't just about being the fastest or the most powerful. It was about finding the right balance, the most elegant, most efficient solution.
Absolutely. Okay, so we know these Kai cars were, well, they were technological marvels in their own right. But let's get back to that crazy popularity. Why were Japanese drivers so drawn to them? It can't just be about the cuteness factor.
No, no, not at all. It was also about practicality and economics. So Kai cars had lower taxes, cheaper insurance, even exemptions from some parking rules. And in a place like Japan, super densely populated, space is tight, that was a huge deal.
Plus, you could zip through those crowded city streets in a Kai car. Way easier and cheaper than trying to maneuver a gas guzzler.
Right. Fuel efficiency was, and still is, a big deal in Japan. Some of these Kai cars can get over 60 miles to the gallon. It's amazing.
There's a quote from one of the articles that sums it up perfectly. It says, Kai cars are the perfect solution for drivers to park in areas such as busy city centers conveniently. They were really designed for how people live in Japan.
Yeah, absolutely. And it wasn't just about city driving. I mean, the variety of Kai vehicles they came up with is amazing. Not just those tiny hatchbacks. They made mini trucks, vans, even mini campers, all within those Kai car rules.
So practical, fuel efficient, and with tons of options. I mean, no wonder they were such a hit in Japan. But here's the million-dollar question. Why haven't they really taken off globally? We've talked about exports, but they haven't conquered the world in the same way that other Japanese cars have.
That's a good question. There are a few reasons for that. First, their size. I mean, they're great in Japan, where space is limited, but in markets where bigger is often seen as better, as safer, it's a harder sell.
It's so interesting how what we think of as a good car can be so different in different parts of the world.
Yeah, definitely. And then there's the whole issue of regulations. Kai cars are designed for very specific Japanese rules, and those don't always line up with safety standards in other countries.
So it's not just what people like, but actual legal hurdles they have to get over.
Right. It's a shame because honestly, I think there's something about them that could appeal to people all over. You know, there was even a European microcar, the Smart 42 Smart K, that was sold in Japan as a Kai car for a bit.
Wow, I didn't know that. It really shows how unique this Kai car category is. It's like a perfect blend of Japanese needs, their car culture, and their ingenuity.
It really is.
So we've talked about how these were kind of like technological marvels, but I'm also curious about their cultural impact. They're more than just cars in Japan, aren't they? They're kind of like cultural icons.
Yeah, they really are. I mean, they're practical, yes, but they also represent this playfulness, this idea that you don't need a huge, powerful car to get around and have a good time.
That's so cool.
It is.
And I've read that they're popular with all sorts of people in Japan, first-time car owners, people living in cities with limited space, even older drivers who like how easy they are to use.
Makes sense, right?
Yeah, so versatile. And when one article even mentioned that some young women in Japan, they see them as fashion statements, almost like owning a really cool handbag.
I've heard that too.
It's wild how they went from being just a practical car to being a way to express yourself, a part of your style.
Yeah, that's pretty fascinating.
Okay, so we've talked about the past and the present, but what about the future? We briefly touched on electric cars earlier, but what other trends do you see shaping this whole category going forward?
Well, like you said, electrification is definitely a big one, and it's a perfect fit. I mean, key cards have always been about being super efficient, and electric motors take that even further. We're already seeing some really interesting electric Kai cars hitting the market.
Makes total sense. It's like taking the core idea of the car and bringing it into the future.
Exactly. But I think we'll see even more than just that. There'll be this focus on smart design, on integrating technology seamlessly. Key cars are already good at using space well, but imagine what they could do with new materials and manufacturing techniques.
Wow. So we're talking like cars with interiors that can transform into offices or even tiny apartments.
Uh-huh. I mean, who knows, right? The possibilities are pretty exciting. We could see things like advanced driver assistance systems, displays that project information onto the windshield, maybe even self-driving key cars someday.
It's like a mini spaceship on wheels.
That's the spirit.
Yeah.
And those Japanese engineers, they're incredible at finding creative solutions, especially within limitations. That's where you get real innovation.
So true. It's amazing to think how these little cars that were born out of necessity in post-war Japan, they've evolved into these almost futuristic vehicles.
It really is a testament to human ingenuity, isn't it? How we can adapt, how we can turn limitations into something incredible.
It really is. Now, we've talked about why they're so popular in Japan, how they're starting to get more attention around the world, but I think we still haven't fully answered why they haven't taken over globally yet.
You're right, we mentioned size, regulations, cultural differences, but there's also how people see them. For a long time, Kei cars were seen as, well, as kind of strange, like novelty cars almost.
Like something you'd see clowns piling out of at the circus.
Aha, exactly. But I think people are starting to see them differently now. Thanks to the internet and social media, there's more interest in Japanese culture, and people are appreciating them for what they are. Unique, well-designed, and even stylish cars.
It's like they're finally getting the recognition they deserve.
I think so. And as we focus more on sustainability, on efficient transportation, their small size and fuel efficiency suddenly seem very appealing.
It's almost like they were way ahead of their time, just waiting for the world to catch up.
Yeah, maybe they were. They came from a need for efficiency, but those ideas, being practical, being fun, they resonate now more than ever.
Absolutely.
So, what does this mean for the future of Kai cars outside Japan? Could they finally break through and be successful in other markets?
What do you think?
Well, it's hard to say for sure, but if car companies can adapt them to meet global safety rules, if they can explain what makes them special to a wider audience, I think there's a chance they could become popular beyond Japan.
Yeah. Imagine those little cars all over the world. It would be amazing to see a shift towards practicality, efficiency, and, just cars that are fun to drive.
It would be pretty cool. It would show that people are open to new ideas, that good things can come in small packages.
So true. Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've talked about the history of cat cars, how they've evolved, how they fit into Japanese culture, even what it's like to actually own and drive one. But I feel like there's still a lot more to unpack, especially when it comes to their cultural significance in Japan. They're more than just cars over there, aren't they?
You're absolutely right. Kai cars are woven into the fabric of Japanese society. It's a whole other dimension to explore.
So let's dig into that. What makes Kai cars so culturally significant in Japan?
Well, I think it all starts with where they came from. Remember, they emerged after World War II when Japan was rebuilding, and they played a crucial role in getting the country back on its feet. They became symbols of resilience, of ingenuity, and that connection has stayed strong.
Yeah, one of the sources even mentioned that early on, a lot of Kai cars were used as delivery vehicles for small businesses and shops.
That's right.
They were vital to the economy, really.
Absolutely. They were like these little engines of commerce, moving goods through the streets, connecting people. It's remarkable how even as Japan's economy grew, even as people had more money, Kai cars remained popular. They evolved, they kept up with the changing
And
times.
that's so cool. They're not stuck in the past. They've always been adapting, finding new ways to stay relevant.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And they appeal to so many different kinds of drivers across different generations. For example, they're super popular with first-time car buyers and young people.
Oh, yeah, I've heard that too.
It's like a rite of passage.
Totally. Almost like getting your first bike.
Uh-huh, yeah. And for a lot of young people, they're not just a way to get around, they're a way to express themselves.
Like we were talking about earlier, that whole fashion statement thing.
Exactly. People customize them, personalize them, make them their own. It's really cool to see.
It's amazing how something so practical can also be so stylish, so personal.
It is. It's that balance of practicality and playfulness that makes them so unique.
Yeah. They're like little pieces of Japanese culture rolling down the street.
Well said.
Okay, so we've talked about their history, how young people see them, how they can be used to express your style. What else makes them so culturally important in Japan?
Well, you can't talk about Kai cars without talking about city life in Japan. They're made for it.
Right. We talked about how practical they are in crowded cities, but I think there's more to it than that.
Definitely. In a lot of ways, they're perfectly designed for the challenges and the unique energy of Japanese cities.
Okay, break that down for me. How do Kai cars fit into that urban landscape?
Well, first off, nothing beats their maneuverability. They're so small they can easily navigate those super narrow streets and tiny parking spots.
That's a lifesaver in places like Tokyo.
Right. And they're so fuel efficient, perfect for stop and go city traffic.
So they're not just practical, they also contribute to the look and feel of those Japanese cities.
Yeah, think about it. Those bright colored little trucks zipping through those neon lit streets, they're almost like something out of a movie.
Totally. They add to the energy and personality of the city.
And I think that's part of why people love them. They bring a sense of fun, of playfulness to city life, which can be pretty serious and intense sometimes.
Like a little reminder not to take things too seriously.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Even in the middle of all the hustle and bustle, there's room for joy, for a little bit of whimsy, and key cars capture that perfectly.
You know, we've covered so much ground here. History, technology, popularity, global perception, cultural impact. It's been a whirlwind.
It has, but I think we're starting to get a real sense of what makes these little cars so special.
I agree. But before we move on, there's one last thing that really stood out to me in our research.
Here.
The link between key cars and that Japanese emphasis on craftsmanship, on attention to detail.
Yes, that's a big part of their appeal, both in Japan and for people around the world who admire them.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that. How do you see that reflected in key cars? How do they showcase that craftsmanship?
Well, I think it starts with how they're designed and engineered. Japanese automakers have a reputation for precision, for quality, and that extends even to their smallest vehicles.
Yeah.
It's not just about luxury cars. Even these little Kai cars are built with incredible care.
So that attention to detail, it's everywhere.
Yeah, pretty much. From the way the interior is put together to how smoothly the engine runs, every detail is thought through. One article mentioned that some Kai car engines are tuned so precisely they can rev all the way up to 9,000 RPM.
Wow, that's amazing. Like tiny high-performance machines.
It is pretty amazing.
Like that little works of art almost.
They kind of are, and it's not just the mechanics. The way they look, their styling often reflects that Japanese aesthetic sense.
I know what you mean. There's that minimalism, that understated elegance in a lot of Kai car designs.
Yeah, they're not trying to be something they're not. It's like they're perfectly cut gems, simple and beautiful.
I love that.
Me too.
It almost reminds me of the Japanese idea of wabi-sabi, that beauty you find in imperfection and simplicity.
You're right. There's definitely a connection there. Kai cars, with their small size and unconventional looks, they have a different kind of beauty, a unique charm.
It's like they're proving that you don't need to be big and flashy to be beautiful.
Exactly. And that attention to detail, it goes beyond the cars themselves. It's in how they're marketed, how they're sold.
Really? Tell me more about that.
Well, I've noticed that in Japan, Dealerships often showcase Kai cars with a lot of care, a lot of attention. You don't always see that with other bigger vehicles.
So they're not treated like they're just basic cars.
Not at all.
That's cool.
They're presented with pride, you know? And the salespeople, they really know their stuff. They're passionate about these little cars.
It's like they understand that Kai cars are more than just cars. They represent Japanese culture, that dedication to craftsmanship.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. And as more people around the world discover Kai cars, I think they'll start to see that too, that connection to Japanese craftsmanship.
I agree. The world could definitely use more of that beauty, precision, and care, no matter what size package it comes in.
Well said.
Well said.
Okay, I think it's time we shift gears a little bit. We've talked about all the ideas, the history, the cultural impact. But what about the actual experience of owning and driving a key car? Let's get real. Let's talk about what it's actually like to live with a key car. What can someone expect if they're thinking of getting one? What are the ups and downs?
Well, the first thing you notice is the size. It takes some getting used to if you've been driving bigger cars.
I can imagine.
It's a different experience.
But I bet parking's a breeze.
Oh, it's a dream. Parallel parking, forget about it. You can fit in pretty much anywhere, and zipping through tight city streets, it's what they were made for.
That's awesome.
It is.
But what about longer drives, like on the highway? Some articles mention that they can feel a bit shaky at higher speeds.
Yeah, that's true. Key cars aren't really meant for long hauls on the highway. They're lighter and smaller, so they can be a bit more affected by wind and things like that. So, probably not the ideal car for a road trip across the country.
Probably not the best choice for that, no. But around town, for shorter trips, they're great. Plus, you can't beat that fuel economy.
That's true.
It makes a difference.
Okay, but what about inside? Are they as cramped as they look from the outside?
It really depends on the specific car, but you'd be surprised how much space they can squeeze out of those little things. They've gotten so good at making the most of every inch.
I've seen pictures of those key vans where the seats fold completely flat, like the whole back turns into a cargo area.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of the newer ones, even though they're small, they're actually quite comfortable. They come with some pretty nice features too: touch screens, navigation, even heated seats.
Wow.
It's true.
So they're not just basic stripped-down cars anymore.
No, not at all. They've come a long way.
Okay, so they're practical, they're fuel efficient, they even have some fancy features these days.
Yeah.
But what about the fun factor? Are they actually fun to drive?
Oh, yeah. That's one of the best things about them, honestly, because they're small and light. They handle really well. They're super responsive.
Like a go-kart, I bet?
Pretty much. And a lot of the sportier models have surprisingly powerful engines, considering how small they are.
So they're zippy?
They are. They're a blast to drive. Honestly, they're just fun little cars.
You know, after all this research, all this talking, I'm actually kind of tempted to try one out myself.
I wouldn't blame you. They're so unique, there's really nothing else like them.
Maybe we should do a follow-up deep dive sometime, where we actually get behind the wheel of some Kai cars and share our experiences.
Now, that's an episode I would love to do.
Okay, it's a date. But for now, I think we've given everyone a pretty good overview of Kai cars. We've talked about their history, how they've changed over time, their place in Japanese culture, even what it's like to live with one.
It's been a fun journey.
It has.
We've covered a lot.
And we've seen how these little cars, they started out of necessity in post-war Japan, but now they've become these symbols of innovation, of efficiency, of just pure driving enjoyment.
They really show how creative people can be, how limitations can lead to some pretty amazing things.
I love that.
Me too.
You know, even though they haven't quite taken over the world outside Japan, there's something about them that I think a lot of people can connect with. That idea of not needing a huge gas-guzzling car to get around, that less can actually be more.
Absolutely. They represent a different way of thinking about cars, about getting from point A to point B.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Simpler way, maybe.
And as cities get more crowded, as we think more about the environment, those small, efficient designs are starting to make a lot of sense.
Right. It's like they were ahead of their time, ready for a world that's looking for smarter, more sustainable solutions.
And more fun solutions, too, right?
Of course. They haven't lost that.
It's like they found this perfect balance between practicality and personality.
They really... Okay, I have to bring up something specific that I found really interesting while we were researching all this. One of the sources highlighted the Suzuki Jimny and how it's managed to gain a lot of attention globally, even though it's a Kai car.
Ah, the Jimny. It's kind of like the exception to the rule.
Right. Most Kai cars are meant for city driving, But the Jimny's this rugged off-roader. It's like a mini 4x4.
Exactly. But you know what? It really highlights how diverse the Kai car category is.
That's true.
It's not just one type of car. There are hatchbacks, vans, trucks, even campers. It's amazing how many different kinds of vehicles they've managed to squeeze into those Kai regulations.
It's incredible. And those restrictions, they seem to have pushed those designers to be even more creative, like a challenge to see how much they could pack into those tiny cars.
I think a design puzzle.
Totally. I
Yeah.
was looking at this photo gallery in one of the articles, and there's this Kai car, the Autozam AZ-1. It looks like a tiny supercar with gull-wing doors.
Oh, yeah. The AZ-1, that's a classic. It's like they took a supercar and shrunk it down. Imagine showing up somewhere in that.
You'd steal the show.
Definitely.
And it wasn't just about looks either. Some of those key cars were pretty serious performance machines. I read about the Daihatsu Core Avanzato TRXX R4. It had a turbocharger and all-wheel drive, like a little rally car.
The Avanzato, yeah. That one's legendary in the Kai car world. It proves that you don't need a massive engine to have a lot of fun driving.
So much power packed into such a tiny package. It makes you wonder if they've ever been used in motorsports.
Actually, they have. There are Kai car racing series, especially in Japan. They're super popular.
I can only imagine.
Those little cars zipping around a track.
It must be so much fun to watch.
It is. The drivers are incredibly skilled, and the cars are tuned to perfection.
You know, it's clear that there's something about Kai cars that sparks people's imaginations.
Yeah.
They're more than just cars. They're like little bundles of personality
Yep.
and potential.
I think that's why they've become such a big part of Japanese culture. They represent that mix of innovation, practicality, and a touch of whimsy.
That playful.
Yeah.
Like you can't help but smile when you see a tiny truck loaded up with stuff, or one of those brightly colored microvans darting through traffic.
It's true. They bring a little bit of joy to everyday life.
Okay, so we've talked about the past, the present, even the sporty side of Kai cars. But what about the future? We've mentioned electric Kai cars, but what other trends do you think will shape them going forward?
Well, electrification is definitely going to be huge, and it just makes sense for these cars.
Right.
They've always been about being as efficient as possible, and electric motors are a perfect way to do that. We're already seeing some cool innovations in that area.
It's like taking the core idea of a Kai car, small, efficient, fun, and giving it a futuristic twist.
Yeah, exactly. But I also think we'll see more focus on making them even smarter, integrating new technology even more seamlessly. Think about it. They're already experts at maximizing space, but imagine what's possible with new materials and manufacturing techniques.
Whoa. So you're talking like Kai cars that can transform, like their interiors can become mobile offices or even living spaces.
Hey, why not? Think big. We could see Kai cars with advanced safety systems, with displays that project information right onto the windshield, maybe even self-driving Kai cars someday.
Wow, that'd be awesome.
It's all about pushing the boundaries, and Japanese engineers are great at that. They thrive on challenges, on finding creative solutions within limitations.
It's pretty amazing to think how these little cars, born out of necessity in post-war Japan, they might become the future of transportation.
It really shows how much potential there is in simple, clever ideas.
Okay, we've talked about why they're so popular in Japan, why they're starting to get more attention globally, but I still think there's a bit of a mystery around why they haven't really taken off worldwide.
Yeah, it's an interesting question.
I mean, we talked about size, regulations, cultural factors, but is there something else?
Well, I think it also comes down to how people see Kai cars. For a long time, outside of Japan, they were viewed as these kind of quirky novelty vehicles, you know.
Like those tiny cars you see clowns piling out of?
Haha, exactly.
But I think that's changing.
I agree. Thanks to the internet and social media, more people are exposed to Japanese culture. They're starting to appreciate Kai cars for what they are: unique, well-designed, even stylish cars.
It's like they're finally getting their moment to shine on a global stage.
And with all the talk about sustainability these days, their small size and fuel efficiency are suddenly big selling points.
It's like they were always ahead of the curve,
Maybe they were.
just waiting for the rest of the world to catch up.
Exactly.
So do you think they have a real chance of breaking through, of becoming more mainstream in other markets?
It's possible. I think it depends on whether car companies can make them meet safety standards in different countries and if they can really get people excited about what makes them special.
Imagine a world where you see Kai cars all over the place, in cities around the globe. It would be a sign that people are open to new ideas, to embracing practicality and, of course, fun.
That would be fantastic. It would show that we're moving towards a different way of thinking about transportation.
Totally. Where it's not just about getting from point A to point B, but enjoying the ride.
Exactly.
Okay, I think it's time to switch gears a little bit and talk about something that really fascinates me about kei cars. Their connection to Japanese culture. We've touched on it a bit, but I'd love to dive deeper into what makes them so culturally significant in Japan.
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic.
They're more than just cars over there, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. They're deeply woven into the fabric of Japanese society.
So where do we even begin? What makes them so special in a cultural sense?
I think you have to start with their history. They came about during a really difficult time for Japan right after World War II. They helped the country get back on its feet. They became symbols of resilience, of Japanese ingenuity, and that's a connection that people haven't forgotten.
Makes sense.
And then there's how they were used in those early years. One of the sources mentioned how a lot of kei cars were used as delivery vehicles for small businesses and shops.
Right. I remember that.
It was essential.
Yeah.
They were vital to rebuilding the economy.
They were like tiny engines of commerce, literally.
Exactly. Zipping through the streets, delivering goods, connecting communities. And what's amazing is that even as Japan became more prosperous, even as people could afford bigger cars, the kei car never went away.
That's what's so cool about them.
It is.
They've always found a way to stay relevant, to adapt to the changing times.
Absolutely. And they appeal to such a wide range of people. They're popular with young people, first-time car buyers, older drivers, you name it.
It's like a rite of passage for young drivers in Japan getting their first kei car.
It really is. And for a lot of young people, it's not just transportation. It's a way to express their individuality, to make it their own.
Yeah, like we talked about before, they can be fashion statements, like a cool accessory.
Exactly. You see all sorts of customized kei cars on the streets of Japan.
So cool.
Yeah, they're like little canvases for self-expression.
It's amazing how something so practical can also be so stylish, so personal.
It's that unique combination of practicality and playfulness, you know? That's what makes them so special.
They're like little pieces of Japanese culture driving around.
Perfectly put.
Okay, so we've talked about their history, their popularity with young people, how they can be personalized. What else makes them so culturally important?
Well, I think you have to consider the role they play in Japanese cities.
Oh, absolutely. We touched on that earlier, but I think there's a lot more to unpack there.
Definitely. They're not just practical in cities, they're almost perfectly designed for life in a Japanese city.
Okay, so how do they fit into that urban landscape?
Well, for one thing, they're incredibly maneuverable.
Yeah.
They can easily navigate those narrow streets and tiny parking spaces that you find in a lot of Japanese cities.
Essential in a place like Tokyo, right?
Oh, absolutely. And their fuel efficiency is perfect for stop-and-go traffic.
Makes sense.
So they're incredibly practical.
But I think it goes beyond just practicality.
It does.
There's something about them that adds to the vibe, the aesthetic of Japanese cities.
You're right. Think about those brightly colored kei trucks driving through the neon-lit streets of Tokyo. It's a unique look.
I know, they're like little bursts of color and personality.
Exactly. And I think that's part of why people love them so much. They bring a sense of fun, of playfulness to a place that can feel pretty serious and intense sometimes.
Yeah, they lighten things up a bit.
Exactly.
It's like they're a reminder to not take life too seriously.
I love that.
We've talked about the history of kei cars, how they've evolved, how they're becoming more popular globally, and their deep connection to Japanese culture. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to circle back to something that really stood out to me in our research. The connection between kei cars and the Japanese emphasis on craftsmanship, on attention to detail.
Ah, yes. That's a huge part of what makes them special, not just in Japan, but for people all over the world who admire them.
So how do you see that reflected in kei cars? What makes them stand out in terms of craftsmanship?
Well, it starts with the design and engineering. Japanese car companies are known for their focus on precision, on building things that last, and that's true even for their smallest cars.
So that dedication to quality, it's not just for their luxury models, it's across the board.
Exactly.
Even for the kei cars.
Yeah, it's all about the details. From the way the interior is assembled to how smoothly the engine runs, everything is carefully considered. One article even mentioned that some kei car engines are so finely tuned that they can rev up to 9,000 RPM.
Wow.
I know. Amazing, right?
That's incredible. It's like they're miniature high-performance machines.
They really are. And it's not just the mechanics. The way they look, the styling, it often reflects that Japanese aesthetic sensibility too.
I know what you mean. There's that minimalism, that understated elegance to a lot of key car designs.
Right, they're not flashy or over the top. It's like they're perfectly cut gems, simple and beautiful.
I love that. It reminds me of wabi-sabi, the Japanese philosophy of finding beauty in imperfection and simplicity.
That's a great connection. Kei cars, with their small size and unique looks, they have a different kind of beauty, a charm all their own.
It's true.
It's like they're saying you don't have to be big and bold to be beautiful. And that attention to detail, it goes beyond the cars themselves.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, have you ever noticed how Kei cars are presented in dealerships in Japan?
I haven't, actually. Tell me more.
They're showcased with such care, with so much attention. It's not something you always see with bigger, more expensive cars.
Interesting. So they're not treated like they're just entry-level cars.
Not at all. They're treated with respect.
That's so cool.
And the salespeople, they're so knowledgeable about Kei cars, you can tell they're passionate about them.
It's like they understand that these cars are more than just cars.
They get it.
They're a reflection of Japanese culture, that craftsmanship, that attention to detail.
Exactly.
And as more people around the world learn about Kai cars, I think they'll start to appreciate that too.
I hope so. The world could definitely use more of that beauty, that precision, no matter how small the package it comes in.
So true. Well, I think it's time to shift gears a bit. We've talked a lot about the big picture, the history, the cultural impact, but what about the nitty-gritty of owning a Kai car? What's it actually like to drive one every day? Let's get down to brass tacks. What can people actually expect if they decide to get a Kai car?
Yeah, let's talk reality. What are the pros and cons of living with a Kai car day to day?
Well, we have to talk about the size, right? It's kind of the first thing you notice. It must be a big adjustment if you're used to bigger vehicles.
It is. It takes some getting used to, for sure.
I bet parking's the dream, though.
Oh, parking is amazing. You can practically fit anywhere. Parallel parking becomes a game.
I can only imagine. And I bet it's a breeze to navigate those narrow city streets.
Oh, yeah, they're made for it.
So, city driving, no problem. But what about those longer drives, maybe on the highway? I know we touched on this before, but a lot of the articles mention that Kai cars can feel a bit unstable at higher speeds.
Yeah, that's definitely something to keep in mind. They're not really designed for long hauls or for driving really fast. They're lighter, smaller, so they can be affected by wind more easily.
So maybe not the best choice for a cross-country road trip.
Probably not. But for getting around town for those shorter trips, they're perfectly fine. And of course, there's the amazing fuel efficiency.
Right. We keep coming back to that, but it's a big deal.
It is. Especially these days.
Okay, let's move on to the interior. Is it as cramped as it looks from the outside?
That's the question everyone asks.
Right.
Honestly, it depends on the model.
Okay.
But you'd be surprised. Japanese car makers have gotten so good at using space efficiently, it's almost an art form.
I've seen pictures of those K-vans where the seats fold down flat and the whole back turns into this big cargo space.
Exactly. They're so clever about it. And these days, even though they're small on the outside, a lot of them are actually pretty comfortable on the inside. They come with a lot of nice features too. Touch screens, navigation, some even have heated seats.
Wow. So they're not just bare bones anymore. You can get some pretty luxurious stuff.
That's right. Things have come a long way.
Okay, so we've got practicality, fuel efficiency, even some fancy features. But the big question is, are they fun to drive?
Oh, definitely. That's one of the best things about them.
I bet.
They're small and light,
Yeah.
so they handle really well. They're super responsive.
Like a little go-kart?
Yeah, pretty much. And some of them, especially the sportier models, have surprisingly powerful engines for their size.
So they've got some zip to them.
They do. They're a lot of fun to drive.
You know what? After learning so much about them, I'm kind of tempted to get one myself.
I wouldn't blame you. They're really unique. There's just something special about them.
Maybe we should do a follow-up deep dive where we actually get to test drive a few different key cars and report back.
That would be awesome. I'm in.
It's a date. But for now, I think we've covered a lot of ground. We've explored the history of key cars, how they've evolved, their impact on Japanese culture, even what it's actually like to own one.
We've covered a lot.
We've talked about the technology, the racing scene, their growing global popularity.
And we've seen how these little cars that were born out of necessity, they've become these really cool symbols, innovation of doing more with less.
And having some fun along the way.
Exactly. They're a reminder that sometimes smaller can be better.
That's so true.
And I want to thank you for having me on to talk about Kai cars. This has been a blast.
It's been my pleasure, really. And a big thank you to all our listeners. This deep dive was specially made for the Vintage Car Chronicles Daily Show, which you can find right here on Spotify.
Be sure to check back every day for new episodes. We've got something new for you every time.
And if you've ever driven a Kai car, or if you're thinking of getting one, let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
And here's a little something to think about.
Okay.
If you could design your own Kai car, what would it look like? What would it be for? Who'd you build it for?
Let us know. We'd love to hear your ideas.
Until next time, keep on driving.
And remember, life's too short to drive boring cars.